Wow. Good afternoon. We're officially in the afternoon now. How good is this? I mean, all these amazing people coming together and in this beautiful new tower, and I think this is the first big event that's been done in this tower. Give yourselves. And so this tower is not just the financial capital center of China, it's also now an intellectual capital center and forum. So I think that's fantastic. Give yourselves a hand again. So I'm David Nieh, and my passion is sustainability and also along creativity. But more than that, I love to see others being empowered. And so what I'd like to share with you today is my own thoughts and my own personal journey of ways of seeing, and also how we balance these things and make a better future for ourselves and others. So as many of you know, architects see things a little differently. You know, we've had some other great speakers that also see things differently, and I think that's the key. And architects are trained in places like this. You know, places that have desks, they're not always this clean, but for intense focus and creativity, but also a sense of community and of social interaction and knowledge exchange. In fact, I have a classmate of mine and former colleague here today, Marshall Scribala, who is the designer of this building when he was with Gensler. Marshall, why don't you stand up? Take it back. So you can see how tall Marshall is. He's like a super high-rise himself. And we used to have races at midnight when all the sugar was kicking in, caffeine, and we'd race up these trusses in this shed, and he would always win because he was able to get from truss to truss, while people like me would kind of just struggle along. But really, again, you know, how is it that we see things? How do we see things the normal way, and how do we see things in a counter way and balance these? So I want to take you several thousand miles away. This is in a private canyon called Nieh Canyon in New Zealand, near the birthplace of commercial bungee jumping by a guy named A.J. Hackett in 1986. So that's already, 30 years ago. So they've been pushing it faster, farther, and deeper. And so I had to sign every legal right my life away to be able to go into this place. And so what he's made here is he's made a 600-meter swing. So it goes 600 meters, and you can fit this building pretty much just into this canyon sideways. And the moment of truth comes when you're about to take the leap of faith, and you walk out on this kind of derrick, and it's kind of shaking around, and you can hear your own footsteps, you know, or you think you're hearing somebody else's footsteps behind you. And then you get harnessed into something like this. Well, while they're trying to figure this out, so I'm in this harness, you know, I'm sitting there contemplating this canyon. I figure, well, you know, I can only do this once. I'm there with my two daughters, my older daughter, Haley, my younger daughter, Dana, and they're rooting me on. And I'm contemplating this canyon, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll just, you know, this will be interesting to do once. But basically, I plunge into this canyon, my creative juices are flowing, and my daughters are, you know, and they caught me at a moment's surprise, too, that the operator is very, very evil, and he just gets you at the moment you least expect. And so I think we've all had moments like this. So then the next time I decided to try it again. And this time I decided to do it backwards. It's a very, very different view. And so the main thing with this was not only did it work backwards, I decided to do it upside down. And I didn't have a GoPro strapped to my head, but really, trust me, it was the rush of seeing the ground coming at you very fast, almost like a free fall. And you see your whole life going before you, and you contemplate many things. And really, really, another really great perspective of looking at things. So I think architects, too, is what we look at perspectival space, and we look at how do we rationalize this, and how do we record this so we can share it with more people. And this is a very famous woodcut in 1525 from Albrecht Dürer, who was from Nuremberg, a German. So he was very, very fascinated about the science and the mathematics of perspective space. And so from his view, he was able to construct this and then grid it out and start to plot this from his vantage point. And he would go down to Italy. This was really the Renaissance. He was good friends with Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and others. And so he would really look at how do you make space and how do you start to map these things out. But the other way architects see these things are really from two different ways. So this is a map, we call it a figure ground map. And so you might imagine if you're in a car and you're trying to negotiate and get to somebody's house, you look at the roads, you look at the terrain, and you negotiate this. And the water is an unknown in this one. Well, if you're a sea captain coming in, this is your map. You know, how do you negotiate the tides, the currents, the bottom of the ocean, and how do you get into these inlets? Whereas the land is a hostile territory. So we need to always look at things from both ways to reconcile what you cannot see. And when we take this into urban planning, urban design, we see spaces on the left that are very, very tight spaces. They make great outdoor rooms. These outdoor rooms become the social and knowledge exchange spaces. But in China and also other places with the advent of modernism, you see the picture on the right. You've got these dingbat-shaped buildings just kind of cookie-cuttered all over the landscape, and they don't make spaces between where people can socialize and build communities. And so I think one way we continue to look at it is we look at a range and a balance of large, small, and medium spaces. You know, so we can come out and go to a coffee shop and meet some friends. Or we can walk a dog in the courtyard of a complex or down the street, or listen to music together in a park. And here's my figure ground cow. So the other things that architects tend to do is we always think about how do we take a whole and how do we divide it up, and how do we take the parts and put it back together again. So culture and cultural views also inform how we do this. So for example, the Western butcher would disassemble this cow this way. And the reason he disassembles it this way is because in the West there was an invention called a cross-cut saw. And so this could cut through bone, cut through anything. And so the most efficient way was to divide this cow up into a series of sections. And then you can imagine a big ribeye steak, juicy steak, and then you further divide it at your place setting with the fork and knife. And you know, and the culture of this is a very individualist act, right? You have your own steak, you don't share it, you just sit there and you eat it. Whereas a Chinese butcher tends to look at a cow this way. The Chinese butcher and the tools they had would take the meat from the bone and separate bone from meat. And then furthermore, kind of a tool like this. And then furthermore, the chef or the cook would then take it and chop it up. And then, of course, people would only have these at the table. Very, very communal, very, very shared sense of eating and an event. So how do we take all these cultural views and tools and ways of seeing and start to fashion something, start to create something like a community? And when I thought about today's main topic, balance, to me, I think we all fit on this matrix somewhere, and our position can change depending on where we are. So, for example, you know, if we're in the U.S., we might feel more Chinese, you know, or we're in China, we may feel more from somewhere else. We're among older people, we might feel younger. We're among younger people, we may feel older. So it's all relative, is what I'm trying to say. So a project that is here in the heart of Shanghai, and I think I have some colleagues here from my former company, called Xingtiandi, or New Heaven and Earth, really exemplified this. It was started in 1997. It was the first time also a developer decided, rather than throw away the old, remake the old and surround it with the new. And the design tension we were playing this from east to west, old and new, was that if you are a Chinese person actually going through this, it actually feels Western. If you're a Westerner going through this, you might actually think it's Chinese. If you're an older person, this has a certain contemporariness and freshness. And if you're a younger person, it has a little heritage and tradition. The next project I worked on was about furthering these concepts and precepts and notions. And it was called a knowledge innovation community. And it was based on the belief that China would accelerate towards a knowledge economy much faster than anybody thought from a manufacturing economy. It was also looking at wedding the best of Silicon Valley type innovation with Chinese entrepreneurism and the spirit of entrepreneurship in the growing and rising market here. So this site is actually several kilometers directly north of us, and it was blessed with being surrounded by 14 universities, 65 research institutes, and 160,000 plus students, and not to mention the teachers. So it was a very intellectual capital fertile ground. And then once you wet it with venture capital and other things, then we believe that we could pull some of these off with real estate as a platform, as a convener, and start to help accelerate and create sparks for a new economy here in China. And coincidentally, its history was, it was the former national center for the nationalist government in 1935. It was a whole new town, and looking at ways of seeing back then to reestablish a new norm. And it is doing it again so now over about almost 100 years later. And in this beautiful place, it was anchored on the National Stadium, which you see here on the right. It was used only a few times, and actually the architect, Dong Dayou, was a returning Chinese architect from the first wave, educated in the West Beaux-Arts style, but wedded it with Chinese themes and Chinese program. And from this beautiful stadium, what we started to do is looking at how do we reinvent this? How do we reprogram this? So one of the things we did is we started the X Games here to celebrate and inculcate a culture of risk-taking. And so we started doing that there, and it started changing the culture of the place. What I learned is that you can always build buildings, which is the hardware, but the harder thing is actually software, and how do you change it? It takes much longer. And this beautiful place had the first live-work residences, lofts, in Shanghai that were zoned properly so you could actually register a business to help these young entrepreneurs, save their money by living and working where they were at and creating community. And things have come full circle. 4 years ago, we put the first Chinese incubator back into Silicon Valley called InnoSpring. And we did this with Silicon Valley Bank and Tsinghua University Science Park. And I think Liu Wanfeng, who's in the middle of this picture here, is I think in the crowd here somewhere. Maybe he can wave or you can talk to him later. Also Charles Chan, a very close friend. We're all part of this very, very exciting thing. And it launched many, many companies, and directly into China without having to go through the US market first. So, the world is big. The world is getting more complex. The world is getting more connected. The world is getting faster with all the technology. And how do we balance ourselves within all this is, I think, one of the key questions facing all of us. And so you see there, before it was A on the left, there were more random networks. People only knew a few people, but with the connectivity now, these scale-free networks, it just exponentially increases the number of people that we can touch and know. So how many people here have WeChat? Okay. And how many people have 100 contacts on WeChat? Let's see your hands. All right, 200, 300. Okay, let's go up a little bit. 1,000, who has 1,000? 2,000. Do I hear 3,000? Anybody have 5,000? 5,000, we have a gentleman from 5,000. Who has 6,000? All right, so I'm told WeChat only maximum is 5,000. Before you need to start another account, so maybe you have multiple accounts. So to the gentleman with 5,000 even, is like, what do we do all day? Right, we're gonna get prehensile thumbs. So this gentleman's network may look like this, a beautiful, beautiful thing, which is these, what they call super hubs, right? So the key now is not how many people know, but the quality of your contacts, not the quantity. And that becomes very, very important. And then balance your life with that. And just know those super hubs. And I think a lot of people know who the super hubs are. And these are the influencers. These are the people that can give you a lot of feedback or get knowledge for you very quickly. So one of my mentors always taught me is that it's not about who knows whom anymore, it's about who knows what. So think about how you expand your own knowledge universe and whom to ask. Because the world is so specialized, nobody knows everything, right? So moving on, I was privileged to teach at this university, Stanford, in the middle of Silicon Valley for several years. And it was a very exciting time. It was when the internet was coming on, and I was also working for the government at the time. And I've done that twice in my career. And for anybody who thought private sector was hard, try working for the public sector. And it teaches you many things, you know. But one of the debates that we were having here, in places like this, which is called the MediaX Lab, and that's a place where I did a lot of teaching, and we looked at how we break down teaching. So it's not just a lecture to lecturees format, but it's about exchange, and that's where we're going to have some workshops tomorrow and the following day. And so it was about this sense of communication. And the reason I taught at Stanford, and my friends think I'm joking, is because I was too poor and too old to be a student. This was the next best thing. And in places like the debate then was very interesting, because what had happened is, for the first time in the school's history, the 7 deans, the provost, and the president all changed within a matter of 2 to 3 years. So there was a lot of change management leadership going on. And the big debate, not just on campus, but off campus, was how do we make the innovation leaders of the future? And we came up with this concept called the pie person. And this is how it occurs. You know, so the classic leader was very deep and broad and balanced across the humanities. You know, arts and language and history and sociology and economics. And then they'd be very good at one thing, right? But what would happen then is that we were looking at lifelong learning and how we continue to raise the bar on the humanities, so that we continue to stay engaged with history and politics and language until, you know, it really becomes the top line. And so many of the great leaders and innovators you'll meet, like some of these on stage today, before and after me, you'll see they're very, very great across the humanities, and they're very good at something. And not only these people are good at something, they're usually really good at something else. And so to foster that between two main expertise in that space in between gives the innovation knowledge capacity. You know, so for example, Steve Jobs, many of you know he loved calligraphy. So he took that and he fashioned it into the fonts and everything else in Apple and made it, you know, the toolbox of the super creatives and gave people the ability to create. Jack Ma Ying, also, he was trained as an English teacher. And he took his love of that with business. He saw where internet was coming. And then he started code writing and then made B2B and B2C platforms, and the rest is history. And actually, I have another guest and distinguished friend here. His day job is he's actually the U.S. ambassador to China. His name is Max Baucus. He's sitting over here. He was actually trained at Stanford also. Max, I'm sorry. And so he was educated back in the 60s, I won't say too much more, in economics as well as law. And that gave him the capability to lead the Senate Committee on Finance, on Environment, and then pulling these things together, among other things, healthcare, tax, you know, that world curiosity, and able to combine all these things. So we're working very much also on the US climate change and the world climate change type of curricula. So I think with that, I want to encourage everybody, really dream big. Anything you can dream of, you can do, you can build. Look deep within, and each part is a building block. So build each step carefully. It's okay to make a mistake every so often, but you build your own house of life. It's underpinned by your families and friends. It's by learning and living and playing and working, and also always give something back. So that's the other balance I want to continue to encourage, you know, and to not do it just for oneself, but do it for others, and that'll give back to yourself as well. So with that, we are all architects of our own destiny, and I encourage everyone to begin it and begin it now. Thank you.